Hola, buenas tardes a todos y a todas. Nos alegra mucho ver que continuamos con el nuevo foro de por la tarde. Que normalmente por las tardes esta hora es muy difícil, que ya sabemos que después de comer lo que pasa. Entonces agradecemos especialmente la asistencia. Bueno, ahora vamos a presentar el documental Planta 5B, que es un documental que hicieron los de Johnson & Johnson, de Janssen, y es un testimonio en primera persona de los enfermeros y cuidadores que constituyeron la primera unidad de VIH en un hospital de San Francisco en los años 80, cuando no se sabía absolutamente nada de lo que era la enfermedad ni cómo se transmitía. Ya he dicho esta mañana un poco que era, de alguna manera, hay algún paralelismo con el COVID, ¿no? Con los principios, sobre todo, de la pandemia, esa desinformación, ese miedo, salvando las diferencias de cómo desde la administración hubo unas políticas muy concretas en los años 80 de silencio de la situación. Recuerdo que Ronald Reagan, hasta el 92, a los 9 años después de los primeros casos de la infección, reconoció que existía una infección, a diferencia de lo que ha pasado con el COVID, que bueno, en muy poquito tiempo todas las administraciones pusieron todos los medios necesarios para investigar, para informar a la población, etcétera. En esos momentos era muy complicado el enfrentarse a una enfermedad que no sabía de por qué venía, que había simplemente unos síntomas, que afectaba principalmente a un colectivo determinado, y sí que hubo un grupo de enfermeros sanitarios que, al margen de todo eso, hicieron valer lo que es el sentimiento de la humanidad, el sentimiento de cercanía, de cuidado de las personas, y se dejaron la piel, como pasa ahora, sin saber lo que les podía pasar, pues, ¿no?, para ayudar a estas personas, y crearon la primera planta de VIH pues, en el año 1980, que es la planta 5B. Va a presentar el documental nuestro compañero, miembro de la Junta, amigo y más cosas, que se llama Ángel Gasch, que es profesor de la Universidad, profesor de enfermería, catedrático. Y bueno, él va a presentar un poquito lo que es el documental y luego espero que os guste a todos y a todas.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Gancho. De catedrático nada, yo estoy bueno, lo primero, buenas tardes, perdón, a todas y a todos. También a la gente que estáis en casa o en el trabajo o donde estéis así de esta manera que nos ha tocado ahora convivir, que es a través de las redes, pues es un esfuerzo añadido el estar ahí presentes, aunque a través de la pantalla, porque siempre en persona, pues bueno, ¿qué voy a decir, no? Que nos gusta estar siempre cerca a la gente, entonces parece que requiere un esfuerzo extra el estar mirando la pantalla en lugar de ver en persona a la gente, ¿no? Entonces, pues eso, también os agradezco que sigáis ahí, que estéis, yo ahora no os veo, pero os imagino. Bueno, yo simplemente agradecer también que pues formar parte un poco de esta jornada, que todos los años, si puedo y si las circunstancias laborales y sobre todo personales ahora me lo permiten, pues agradecer el poder participar, aunque sea un ratito. Y hoy en especial, concretamente me hace especial ilusión también estar aquí porque presentamos un documental que destaca la labor o que hace homenaje a mi profesión, a las enfermeras y a los enfermeros. Entonces, pues me da mucho gusto estar aquí. Luego hablaremos un poquillo, si queréis, haremos un poquillo de debate, pero por comentar un poco, introducir el documental, como bien ha dicho Hancho, se llama 5B, en inglés Word 5B, creo. Ya lo siento por la patada al inglés, pero bueno, hay que intentarlo. Que es parte de una historia real, como también ha dicho Hancho, que es ese esfuerzo que en el 1983 hicieron un grupo de enfermeras y auxiliares y en San Francisco en concreto, para crear la primera planta, o ellos le llaman pabellón, el primer pabellón de personas para atención específica a personas con VIH y sobre todo personas con la enfermedad avanzada, ¿no?, con SIDA. Además, fijaros, 5B, hoy en día las plantas de los hospitales les llamamos el servicio de neumología, el de cirugía vascular, pero en este caso no, era un número y una letra. Y yo creo que esto tiene mucho que ver con eso que también nombraba Hancho hace un momento, de por qué hemos corrido tanto con la COVID, sin quitar la importancia, lógicamente, que ha tenido y que sigue teniendo, pero quizás ese estigma que todavía hoy en día tenemos de otra manera en relación con las personas que viven con VIH, ya en aquel entonces, lógicamente, estaba, ¿no? Y quizás llamar 5B era como, bueno, esa planta, ¿no?, que sabemos que es otra cosa, ¿no?, esa forma de llamar a las cosas que parece que no tienen nombre, ¿no? Y creo que quizás detrás de ahí también estaba el estigma, por supuesto estaba la incertidumbre, el desconocimiento. Los primeros momentos del VIH pues fueron muy, muy complicados. Bueno, pues eso, es un documental que rinde homenaje a la labor del trabajo de enfermería, es un documental estadounidense, hay que decir siempre quién hace las cosas, y en este caso el documental fue dirigido por Oscar Dan Kraus, lo estoy leyendo, porque si no, soy capaz de decir mal el nombre y eso pues es lo peor. Aún así, y Paul Higgins. Este documental además fue ganador del Gran Premio del Festival Internacional de Creatividad de Cannes, Lions, que se llama. Y la crítica, siempre hay que decir lo que ha dicho la gente, ¿no?, sobre lo que se crea, sobre todo a los y las directoras de cine, pues también yo creo que les interesa mucho saber lo que opinan de sus trabajos, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, la crítica ha dicho cosas como, esto sí que lo he mirado en una búsqueda así en Internet y lo que se ha ido trabajando sobre este tema, ¿no?, sobre este documental. El documental, primera frase que me encantó, el documental logró cambiar la percepción del público sobre las enfermeras. Bueno, pues las personas que han visto este documental, y como ahora veréis, uno no se queda neutro, tal cual. Sí que empieza a darle vueltas y a pensar en la importancia del trabajo de enfermería, ¿no? Entonces creo que, pues bueno, un puntico a favor de ese trabajo, más allá del tema en concreto, es eso, ¿no?, que nos ayuda a visibilizar la importancia del trabajo de enfermería. Y también se ha dicho que la pandemia que vive el mundo ahora ha dejado ver el importante rol precisamente de las enfermeras, similar a lo que sucedió con el VIH. Y como decía antes también Hancho, se ha hecho una comparativa entre lo que ha pasado con la COVID-19 y con el VIH. Esto de alguna forma destaca la importancia de enfermería no solamente en la asistencia sanitaria clínica a nivel técnico o tecnológico, ¿no?, pues lo que hacemos, coger una vía, poner inyecciones, dar pastillas, ¿no?, sino también a nivel de que los sistemas de salud necesitan una humanización de los cuidados. Cuando no sabemos de una enfermedad, lo más importante es que nos cuiden, al menos, ¿no? Y las enfermeras que se observan en este documental precisamente es lo que más hacen, ¿no? Pero también el desarrollo, digamos, de la capacidad enfermera para adaptarse a los cambios, a épocas de incertidumbre o a momentos de incertidumbre, y también para aportar nuevas tecnologías que tienen que ver con el cuidado, ¿no? Entonces, pues eso, es una de las cosas que también creo que es importante destacar de este documental. Y, por supuesto, una cosa que se está debatiendo mucho en los últimos años sobre la capacidad de trabajo de enfermería para mejorar la eficiencia de los sistemas de salud. Es decir, cuanto más trabajo de calidad hay de enfermería, la gente está mejor, más cuidada, con lo cual, pues menos gasto al final, si nos importa y nos preocupa el gasto económico, ¿no? Para abrir un poquito boca sobre el documental en concreto, ya veis que evidentemente pues yo he hecho muchas flores a mi profesión, claro, no lo puedo evitar, bueno, porque es necesario. Pero bueno, para abrir un poquito boca sobre el documental, y ya no me enrollo más, aparte de la historia, como os decía, real y desconocida sobre el trabajo de enfermería en el 83, cuando empezaba el tema de la enfermedad por VIH, aparte del tema en concreto, también se habla, en el documental se visibiliza el trabajo de una comunidad concreta en San Francisco. Y a veces, cuando veía el documental, pensaba, ¿por qué se ha dado esta situación concretamente en San Francisco? Pues quizás ese colectivo o ese grupo de población que en un principio se identificó como de mayor probabilidad de transmitir la infección, en San Francisco en concreto había una comunidad gay importante, y quizás las enfermeras también estaban más cercanas a nivel profesional, pero también a nivel personal, ¿no? Formaban parte de esa comunidad, y quizás también esa sensibilidad, a lo mejor simplemente por tema personal, puede ser que conozca a este, puede ser que conozca a otro, también quizás les empujó o ayudó a la hora de tomar la decisión de tan envergadura que fue como crear la sala del hospital, ¿no? Por supuesto, se habla en el documental del trato humano, se habla de estigma, se habla también, como veréis, de fuerza, de energía y de ganas de salir adelante y de superar las situaciones complicadas. También comentar que Se ha grabado el documental en lugares auténticos de la planta 5B, antes de que se demoliera, que ahora está ya demolida, y que algunas imágenes, gracias al trabajo documental que ha realizado el equipo de dirección, algunas imágenes que salen son imágenes que se consideraban perdidas sobre los inicios del VIH en Estados Unidos y en San Francisco en concreto. La película se estrenó en el 2018 en el Castro Theater. Imaginaros el barrio de Castro de San Francisco en Estados Unidos, que tuvo lleno total y fue pues eso, un evento histórico en el cual, pues, aparte de reconocer los dificilísimos momentos que se vivieron en el primer momento de la transmisión del VIH, también el reconocimiento de la labor de enfermería. Bueno, pues luego, si os parece, haremos un pequeño debate, comentaremos lo que nos dé la gana sobre el documental y ahora ya pasamos a verlo. Gracias.
Past year, homosexuals have been coming out into public, refusing to hide in the closets, as they say.
Very, very new scene, certainly new to me, and quite fascinating.
Not 1954 anymore, it's 1973, and boys go to bed with boys, and girls go to bed with girls, and some people go to bed with both.
The 70s were about that attempt that we made to carve out a place for ourselves in society that had never been done before. Just the simple thing of being able to walk hand in hand down the street, people kind of go like, yeah, big deal. It is a big deal because I've had beer bottles thrown at me because of doing that.
The biggest thing that's been accomplished is for a substantial number of people to identify themselves as full-fledged and worthwhile human beings.
This is our day. This is our day.
We are growing in power with every day that passes, and we will not be stopped.
It was wide open. I mean, there were a lot of people my age here. The party scene was wild. In 1981 was when things really began to change.
Scientists at the National Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta today released the results of a study which shows that the lifestyle of some male homosexuals has triggered an epidemic of a rare form of cancer.
I fit the profile, kind of the typical CAPSIS patient in my age, and that I'm gay, but I don't know how I got it.
I was at San Francisco General. I was a clinical nurse specialist. And I saw some of the first young men who got cancer. No one had ever quite dealt with something like this.
At the time, I was working in an intensive care unit, and we had patients that came through with this illness. And then my landlord started getting sick, and within a month or two, boom, he was gone. Everybody was whispering that he had this gay cancer. My boyfriend said, I don't want to get this gay cancer.
And then I started to see my friends getting sick. Weeks later, they were down to skin and bones.
We were just shriveling up and dying. Our immune systems were going. We were catching diseases nobody had ever heard of. I remember that one camping trip because there was this very handsome blonde boy that I was attracted to walking across these rocks looking like a leopard. Within a few months, he was dead.
I started working per diem at the General. I saw these young gay men placed in the isolation rooms at the ends of the hallways.
No one knew.
Disease spread through the air.
Doctors could only treat the symptoms, never the underlying cause. At the beginning, it was only gay men. Only later did drug addicts have it.
And even in nursing, I mean, it was dirty nursing, and people didn't want to get involved with it.
And we all knew at that time it was 100% fatal.
We were expected to wear what we called spacesuits.
Yesterday, I had an X-ray done, and the girl spent 20 minutes gowning up, gloving up, masking up.
We were afraid of them. Everybody was.
Breakfast trays would pile up because even the auxiliary staff didn't want to go in.
I saw patients alone, begging for someone to come assist them.
If they soiled their bed, people were going to wait until the last minute they could to change it. And out and out refuse to take care of people.
I would not want to operate on that patient, no.
Have you had occasion to turn down such an operation?
Yes, I have.
The person said outright, I'm not touching him.
How could you not provide the care that you know how to do?
In hospitals right now, persons with AIDS feel particularly alienated and particularly isolated.
It made me angry. And the director of nursing at San Francisco General came and sat down, and she was like, we have to do something. And I said, okay, I'll do it.
At San Francisco General Hospital, the staff is gearing up for the opening of a special wing to treat AIDS victims.
People were like, well, you're probably going to get AIDS and you're probably going to die. Yeah, I might have some anxiety about this, but I am more pissed off and angry than I am scared.
Let's see signs up about this new unit. I was instantly really interested.
There's an enemy, and it's a disease.
I'd heard about this dedicated AIDS unit. I came from New York, and I had this hope that I could get a job on this unit. I had seen patients being marginalized, and I just found it infuriating. And then I got called for an interview. One of the staff said, "What is your zodiac sign?" And I just said, "Cancer." And she said, "Well, good, because there's too many Leos on nights."
It was built by the nurses there, and they physically built that ward.
We were making it, we were creating it.
The nurses all volunteered for this duty.
If I had said no to any of them, they might have done physical harm to me.
Cliff had a vision. We were gay, we were straight, we were young, we were old.
And they're all kind of kick-ass, even the straight ones.
And he said, go home and talk to your significant others, because we don't know. We can't tell you you're not going to get this disease. I was ready, but I was scared.
My wife and I really couldn't talk about it, couldn't talk about our fear. It was just so much there. But I distinctly remember having recurrent nightmares that I had given it to my kids.
This ward will be empty tonight, the last time for a long while. Tomorrow, AIDS patients will be moving in, and a unique experiment in medical care begins.
And then they started coming. One after the other, in pain or struggling for breath, with an array of immune deficiency that was mind-boggling. Some people could be treated, at least for a while, and they were discharged. Then they came back, unrecognizable, either in appearance or demeanor or both.
From 1 week to the next, you could see the difference. And the amount of time between diagnosis and terminal velocity, or whatever you want to say, was usually less than 4 months.
I mean, medically, this is a horror story. And no one seems to realize it yet.
I remember seeing one patient for the first time. Before I even examined him, I diagnosed 3 simultaneous opportunistic problems that he had.
Have you noticed any change with the capacy since you've been admitted with a pneumocystis pneumonia?
Not really. I have so many lesions, it's rather difficult to...
Every patient said, I'm going to beat this. No one beats this. No one beats this.
I can't, imagine what it must feel like to not feel like you can breathe. It was a very, very unpleasant death. One of the first things David Denmark said to me was, you have to get out of the mode that you're here for curing people and really get into the mode that you're here to care for people.
This patient was dying, and he started saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And I said, why are you saying you're sorry? And he looked at me and he said, I just don't know how to do this. I've never done it before. And everybody in the room just burst out laughing. And then, he died like 3 minutes later.
We decided that if we can't save these folks, we're going to touch them.
And of course, that was a time when nobody even knew how it was spread.
The danger was very real.
We were making an educated guess, but it was a guess. We could have been wrong.
Comes in and grabs my hand. Like I said, I had no human contact for a year. I didn't touch anybody. I mean, you forget love, you forget things like that.
And they didn't have gloves on, the staff. I mean, and that makes such a huge difference. I mean, yeah.
This was a tangible thing you could do. Wash them, put moisturizer on them.
The night sweats could be really difficult, so you might be up all night with someone changing their bed several times.
Other nurses are afraid of their patients and wear these gloves and things and masks, and over here in this ward they are not afraid to touch you and to hold your hand. And
they were permitting us to share this intimate experience of their dying.
It scares me to think that I'll be laying on some slab, and that's what scares me the most.
And I said to staff, people need human contact. You know how to do it?
And they said, crawl in bed with this patient. And this has never happened in my career. And I remember just thinking, what?
When I first became a nurse, there was just this sense that you're supposed to maintain a certain clinical objectivity, and boundaries are important. But here, you were allowed to love your patients.
In the early days of the unit, I met Roger and Gordon. Gordon had pneumocystis pneumonia, and Roger was there with him as much as he could be. They recreated their home in the room. Those champagne glasses, even if it's just for water. And then Roger was ill. They couldn't necessarily care for each other, but they were full of grace. They gave me these little earrings. They weren't very expensive. And usually, you don't take gifts from patients, but they wanted to give me something. Roger died, and Gordon committed suicide at home. That was it was a very, really hard time.
Any major losses lately or major changes?
outside of the diagnosis today, no.
Family's problems, how's family doing?
Got me.
I met one young man. I don't believe his father will let his mother come. And what a thing that they're missing, that they're not here with him when he's hurting.
Just because someone was biologically your family didn't necessarily mean that they were family at all.
My lifestyle was somewhat repugnant to my parents.
Bathhouses, there was a bathhouse down the street about 8 blocks away, and every time I'd drive down there, go downtown, I would look to see if my son's car was there.
I remember when a mother and father appeared, and Dad was like, I want all these people out of here. You know, he brought all this on himself. He's brought disgrace to us.
Someone who has been your partner, you know, for years is not recognized as a visitor or someone who can help you make decisions. I mean, how outrageous is that?
Everything's all taken care of, honey. There's nothing more to take care of.
So we started letting patients define who was family.
No one had really done that. Everyone is so intimidated.
There was never a question of whether you were a relative. If you were there to see somebody, you got to see somebody.
The nurses on 5B were in charge.
They made the rules as they went along, and because they did such a great job taking care of patients, what is the hospital administration going to do? Stuff that seems obvious now, it was revolutionary.
You could have your pet. Pets could visit.
Nurses would squeeze your pet in and put it under a coat.
If their partner wants to lay next to them in bed, we know how to make that happen. Other professionals would come in, and you could see the look. Oh my God, they're, you know, what are they doing?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The probable cause of AIDS has been found, a variant of a known human cancer virus called HTLV-3. We now have a blood test for AIDS, which we hope can be widely available within about 6 months.
I was tested for HIV, I think before it was called HIV. When I was negative, it was, you know, a huge burden taken off, and we could say, you know, with real certainty, if I weren't infected by whatever this thing was, this was not transmissible easily.
It was clear. It wasn't something that was that you got if someone sneezed. It wasn't something that you got if you touched someone's hand or hugged them.
But there were still nurses operating from real fear.
A handful of nurses said today they're being discriminated against because the hospital will not allow them to wear masks and/or gowns and/or gloves around AIDS patients.
There were patients that were on other units that had AIDS, and that they were having to provide care for them, and we were telling them how to provide that care.
And some would refuse to give care.
The nurses work on Ward 4C, a family services ward, also used, however, for overflow cases from the AIDS ward.
I have to protect myself, not only myself, my family, and also other patients.
When they went to the union, we need to make a grievance about this. We don't want to have to take care of these people.
The nurse's lawyer said today a recently obtained memo indicates the hospital accommodates AIDS patients as far as their, quote, sexual needs are concerned.
The issue here is whether or not our clients are in such close proximity to these AIDS patients so that there is danger of infection to themselves and to the public.
When the charge nurse went and made her round to see if he has left, he was doing this thing.
First of all, you have to understand that these patients are far too ill to be having sex. At the same time, we're a healthcare institution. We're here to take care of people's health and their illnesses. We're not here to police people.
They felt like any nurse that had to work with people with HIV should be able to wear all the protective clothing and equipment that they want. Everybody should be wearing gloves all the time. This is a battle for control over the standard of practice for the hospital. The fear was, as a result of this, no one would be allowed to provide human touch to these people, and everything we've done gets dismantled or taken away.
When I pick it out one of the garbage can, you know, when I pull them up, I just feel something could go like that.
There was a needle sticking out of the bag?
Yeah, out of the bag.
This was a bloodborne infection, and you don't want to inject yourself with someone else's blood.
But it takes one stick, and if you're unlucky, then you know, you're dead.
You could get stuck withdrawing a needle. You could get stuck injecting medication.
I had a needle stick. It was indeed scary. The devices at that time, you would have a huge honking needle. The manipulation of that, it's very difficult to be perfect.
And that sense of foreboding was horrible.
There are some workers, even in this hospital, who are really hysterical about the level of risk and truly believe that their chances of becoming infected are enormous.
It has been a devastating 5 years. Nearly 3,000 cases of AIDS have already hit this city. Half those people have died.
There I am, one of the first openly gay TV reporters in the country. The AIDS epidemic was raging.
But the even darker side of the story, what some are already calling the plague years, still lie ahead.
Oh, God, man, I'm grabbing it on.
Robinson, lie on your back. It'll be easier.
We were being bombarded with stuff we hadn't seen before.
Oh, it hurts. It hurts. Shit. It hurts. Oh, it hurts.
Her tube will not be able to be connected to a bag until it's less than 60 cc's a shift. She still has that 20 gauge in her left forearm, which was started on the 15th. She's complaining of increased pain. We need a clean catch urine on her if you can possibly.
From 85 to 87, we started having the first treatments.
We want you to drink the medicine.
Look, tired drinking this shit.
I don't blame you.
The medications had horrible side effects, so patients would get terrible rashes and sometimes a life-threatening condition. We didn't know whether it was going to help or not.
Thought I would last longer than this. I mean, June is my 26th birthday.
And we learned that HIV is a virus with a very long incubation period. So we began to realize that all the people that tested positive were not immune. They were going to get AIDS. They were going to die. And so we knew that we had a problem that wasn't just a few thousand here and there, but hundreds of thousands, over 1 million in the country.
And then the numbers just started shooting through the roof.
We moved to 5A, which was a larger unit.
Why don't you just continue PRM, because that's the fun.
I was operating on so many AIDS patients.
It felt overwhelming. People were afraid. And we found ourselves attacking each other. Everyone was so stressed.
You'd go to the post office, and the guy who'd been behind the counter for years was gone.
Gone. People were being kicked out of their apartments. People were being fired. There was a guy at a company in San Francisco who had died of AIDS, and they burned his desk in the parking lot.
AIDS is 100% fatal, and we're still having arguments about protecting people's rights who've got the disease. I mean, we ought to be focusing on what we do to prevent all of us from getting the disease and dying.
These wars were going on all around you.
If we report those who have the virus, the existing system of confidentiality will protect them just as well.
That's absolutely false. It's very strange to hear someone say, since it's just in gays and just in IV drug users, why should we worry about it?
Fear-mongering really was the point of view of the day.
He proposes that carriers should be tattooed on the forearm and the buttocks to keep the disease from spreading.
I don't understand why gays are opposed to this particular suggestion.
Yeah, there was a whole lot of, fuck you in our feelings.
So there was a real emphasis, make sure that you get filmed touching, because this is the single most powerful message that we can get across.
Nurses are subversive. I didn't know I was being used like that till you just told me, and I love it.
Back then, I lived on Dolores Street, and you had your village, you had your tribe. When I was at the ward, I realized as I'm walking around, I know this person and I know this person, and I was like, and I can remember feeling totally overwhelmed because, oh my God, I know all these people. I know everybody here.
Every other Sunday, there is a party on Ward 5B.
Tap show at 2 o'clock. We would make chicken, turkey. They loved ham. They loved macaroni salad. And you might say you don't want no cake, but when I put it in your face, girl, give me some of that cake. A 7-Up for room 3.
Everyone who could come to that end of that unit would come down.
We'd all sit in the lounge and eat like a family. They used to crack me up. I'll have a large everything and a Diet Coke. I'm like, honey, this is an AIDS ward. We don't have anything diet.
When people's dignity is so threatened and there's so much fear, God, you need some ice cream on the unit.
This is the time for getting down.
And she was going to all these different bars to raise money for these things.
I was just the head cheerleader of a team. I've had families tell me this is the first dinner we've had together in 20 years.
When she came, the patients would come out of their rooms. They may not have been out all week.
We had all these terrible, terrible jokes. I used to say, I love you to pieces, and they said, well, don't say you love me to death.
Where death was so present, why not bring life and laughter and joy?
I got it, thanks to you.
I mean, it's wonderful to make it a wonderful place where you can go die. But it doesn't take away from the fact that they died.
I don't want nobody here to give up. And I don't think that they will, but maybe they will, I don't know.
The nurses would always tell me who can eat, who can't eat, who really needs to eat, or who really needs a hug. Like my friend Shane, he was 23. And I'll never forget, he liked vegetarian food. And I would get him vegetarian lasagna and bring it to him. I was like, okay. And I would go and sit with him. And he would talk about his family.
One night, my dad called, and he said, Greg's gay. He just told me he's gay. This was 1979, and we didn't know anybody gay. My dad was pretty angry and threw him up against the wall. So, I guess then he just went in his room or something, then left the next day. Didn't come back.
I grew up believing, and I still do scripturally, it's not okay, in the homosexual lifestyle. It was very painful for my sister and for the rest of the family.
He wanted his family there, and it was heartbreaking. But at the time, a lot of families had to wrap their head around being gay and having AIDS all at the same time. And America was not ready for that.
This is the AIDS Connection, an all-night dialogue live from across America.
And we have the results of our 900-number survey for this half hour. In answer to the question, are you convinced that AIDS cannot be spread by casual contact? And it's close.
You know, people were worrying about eating at a restaurant. What if the chef or the server had HIV?
I remember being at parties and asking people asking, "What do you do for a living?" And I would say what I did. You know, I work with people with HIV, and people, that was a conversation stopper. People would just sort of literally back off.
One of my sisters had her second child, and so the first time I went home to visit my new niece, and I was very excited to see her. I hear my sister from the back of the room, and she's a nurse, a registered RN, and she's screaming, "Don't let George breathe on the baby."
I was in People magazine. It was in March. My baby was born in April, so I was very pregnant. Straight white female sitting on a bed with a person with AIDS. I got hate mail. I had to get a restraining order at one point because somebody was threatening me.
All the strides that had been made in terms of gay rights up until that time were just kind of pushed off the table.
When somebody comes at you and is looking you in the eye and is calling you a queer, a faggot, and a what would you call it?
People are afraid of the unknown, and the fear can really escalate.
Locally, shocked healthcare workers learned a nurse at San Francisco General was infected after an accidental needle stick.
It's a tragedy that's happened to a very dedicated hospital worker who was doing everything right.
One of us had been stuck with a needle, and that person was now infected with HIV.
I mean, this was our worst nightmare. The nurse became known as Jane Doe. I remember being asked by media people, "Do you know who this person is?" And I was glad to be able to say, "No, I don't." Whoever this person is, we want to do everything we can to protect them.
The odds of contracting the AIDS virus, even after sticking yourself with an infected needle, are tiny. But it happened at San Francisco General to a nurse we'll call Jane.
We are chronically fighting for more staff. We're tired.
Did you have trouble accepting this?
Tremendous. I still do. I still do.
That was just the most awful thing.
I went through a spell where I was drinking more every night when I went home, coping with it with whatever mechanisms you had.
This could be extremely damaging to what we're trying to accomplish here.
Nurses were forbidden to wear masks, gloves, and gowns while in close, direct personal contact with AIDS patients, i.e. cleaning their bodies, dressing wounds that were dripping, changing bed linens that were soiled.
There had been this group that had, for some time, been complaining that they wanted to wear all the protective clothing all the time. And they want the union and the Department of Health to support them.
They're simply saying, look, for the sake of the AIDS patient and for our sake, the sake of hospital personnel and the public, let's take precautionary measures.
They knew how to use the media, and now, of course, they got Congressman Dannemeyer to raise the pressure.
These charges against San Francisco General Hospital aren't new, but they are strong. Strong enough that tonight, Congressman Bill Dannemeyer said the grand jury should open a criminal investigation.
I think we have a duty to protect those healthcare professionals who are taking care of these patients.
And they felt that any nurse that had to work with people with HIV should definitely be paid more. All of us.
If that's the case, the holistic model of care, nursing and social work that we created together on the ward would no longer be affordable.
If we lost, will I be able to keep my staff there? Because we were already viewed as overstaffed. Why should they get more? Often I would be down there in the nursing office and I'd be fighting. You come and see. How are we going to do it? What would you have us do?
We were being attacked on all fronts. I mean, politically, medically, psychologically, socially. I mean, it sucked.
And there was a very prominent doctor at San Francisco General that agreed with them.
Someone else described my risk as being 12% per year and 49% at the end of 5 years of turning positive from occupational exposure.
I ran a MASH unit. Blood would always go through to our underwear and on our abdominal skin, and it was going around in our eyes and all that.
Dr. Lorraine Day is so afraid that she dons a spacesuit every time she operates at a hospital which has already had one nurse infected on the job.
The spacesuits had been worn by orthopedic surgeons for years to protect the patient, because then your air you were breathing wouldn't go into the operating room. It was taken with a tube outside. All I did was add a filter of the air that came in that we were breathing. That's all. It looked the same.
I did think it was an interesting scientific question about whether particles of the virus would be aerosolized in the air. If you were to breathe that in, would that be a method of transmission?
There were, I think, 30,000 orthopedic surgeons in the country at that time. I was the 12th woman.
And for a woman to be the head of orthopedic surgery at a hospital like San Francisco General Hospital, which, because it's a major trauma hospital, really unique at the time.
I was stuck by my co-surgeon with this, and fortunately, it only went through 2 gloves. It didn't go through 3 gloves.
We had patients with the usual risk factors for AIDS or HIV, but I didn't know who was infected. That was the problem.
I think that everyone who is in a position to touch the patient and deal with their body fluids should know.
She understandably was worried about that. How she spoke about it, where she went with it, that's what was really problematic.
A patient comes to us, they demand to be taken care of, but then they say to us, in essence, I have this loaded gun under my coat which can go off and kill you at any moment, and I'm not going to tell you.
She was, a little bit glamorous.
Attractive, dressed well. If she were to step on your foot with those spiked heels, it would go right through your foot. And the personality to match.
It's not patients versus doctors. It is that each individual has no right to put another person's life at risk.
In the absence of compulsory testing, Dr. Day routinely requests all her patients to take an AIDS test before she operates.
How are you feeling?
I feel fine.
Will you sign the consent for me?
Yes.
We can test any patient for any disease without an informed consent, except AIDS, which turned out was not politically correct.
Doctors find out they're positive and say, I'm not going to treat them. It's happened in Shasta County, it's happened in San Mateo County here in California, it's happened in a lot of places across this country.
I never said I would refuse medical care. I just think that my life versus the confidentiality of the patient should at least be a factor that should be considered.
I never even thought about refusing to care for an AIDS patient, ever. I'm not going to deny any surgery, but we need to know what we're dealing with.
Other people who don't know what goes on in an operating room will say, well, why don't you just take those same precautions for everybody? We can't wear that expensive, bulky equipment on everybody.
She became convinced, I think, that we were forcing her to assume risks that were going to result in the deaths of surgeons everywhere.
We knew long before AIDS came along that something horrible was going to happen to that community.
Just in terms of being a community that would vector into any kind of communicable disease. And I have to say, if it hadn't been this, it would have been something else.
They do a lot of drugs and they have a lot of alcohol in that community. They had multiple sexual relationships.
In some people's minds, the bathhouses were just constant orgies going on all the time, and that's not true. But obviously, you had sex.
A whole lot of them either had AIDS or were high risk for AIDS. I just wanted to have a chance to stay alive. Why was it bad that I wanted the patient to be tested for the safety of the healthcare worker?
Northern Florida. 3 hemophiliac boys infected with the AIDS virus are banned from school in the face of community hostility. Shortly after they were readmitted, their home was burned down.
I went over there last night. You can look at it, and obvious the fire started in the children's bedroom. Whoever did it was trying to make a point.
What was going to be done with information about who was HIV positive? There were horrible things happening in other parts of the country that you would hear about. Children being discriminated against in their school, families having to move, being ostracized. It was a very scary time around the idea of people's identities being known.
Up at the nurses' station, you saw a whiteboard with patients' names, and we didn't have last names because people could be persecuted.
Rural Tennessee. Angry parents fight against letting a hemophiliac boy with AIDS into the local public school.
Who's to say that this kid might get mad at somebody and go bite them? Scratch them? I mean, who's to say this? You don't know what's going to happen. It's like putting a loaded gun in this school and just hoping and praying it don't go off.
Oh, yeah. Read that, baby. Read that. Trying to kill everybody else. But you're not going to kill mine, baby. Hey! Go to hell.
Could you be thrown out of your apartment? Would you lose your job? What if your insurance changed? Would you not be able to get further health care?
It's a concern. They might lose their job, but you have to do the right thing.
Well, it's me again. Tried to eat my dinner, but I couldn't. Just not hungry. So, oh well.
When I was visiting with Greg, I didn't know if I had put myself in a position where I was going to contract the disease. It was just a scary thing. Everybody that he knew in San Francisco called him Shane. but his family called him Greg.
Everybody had nicknames, and I don't know why. Like Doug's name was Doug, we called him Fluffy.
He was very sick. But on visits when he felt good, we went to the beach. There was one time we were feeding the birds, throwing bread out. One bird had a broken foot, and Greg took it as his mission to make sure that this bird got food. Greg's heart was huge.
Mom came up. She's been up about 2 or 3 times already. Dad and G-Mom are going to come over here. Then they decided not to come over.
I remember at one point, Greg's dad came to visit Greg at the hospital.
I remember Shane feeling like his father didn't like him. Shane was young. You know, he would say it like that, "My dad doesn't like me."
It was not a healthy interaction between father and son. Critical parent, needy child, and wanting very much to be loved and liked, and I didn't see that happening.
But I'm gonna close for now, okay? Get this in the mail. Then he's gonna be here tonight, and he can maybe deliver it for me.
He was very scared. He said, "I'm worried about my mom. I'm worried about things. I'm worried about Dan." Dan was his partner.
I didn't know how to tread in that water of going and you know, having a relationship with Danny. I didn't know what to do with it. This was new to me. The whole gay community was new to me, and I was still trying to figure it out for myself.
It's time we knew exactly what we were facing. And that's why I support some routine testing. I've asked the Department of Health and Human Services to determine as soon as possible the extent to which the AIDS virus has penetrated our society and to predict its future dimensions.
I stood in front of Ronald Reagan in 1987 in Washington when he was giving a speech. It was the first time he mentioned AIDS publicly, 1987. All right, 6 years into the epidemic. I made a note in my reporter's notebook that night, the night of that speech, as I'm looking at him, that I made a note that at that moment that he said that word for the first time, AIDS, 21,000 Americans had already died. That's what I remember.
The members of President Reagan's Commission on the AIDS epidemic prepared for their first look at the virus that causes AIDS. There were 8 men and 5 women. Few of them had any depth of experience, either with the virus or the people sick from it. That included the chairman, James Watkin.
I was working with this really lovely man who I think had his 4th bout of pneumocystis pneumonia, and he had agreed to meet with a representative from Ronald Reagan's Presidential AIDS Commission, and the representative from the commission had declined to shake the patient's hand.
Nothing hit me harder than the betrayal of this country.
Nothing is worse.
Mayor Dianne Feinstein, her AIDS budget for the city of San Francisco was bigger than President Reagan's was for the entire nation. And that was true for 2 years in a row.
Hank Plant has the latest tonight in an exclusive AIDS Lifeline report. Hank.
I always enjoyed talking to the bad guys.
Many insurance companies are worried about future health benefits they might have to pay if gay policyholders come down with AIDS.
There was a guy who had applied for insurance, and they couldn't ask him if he was gay, because that was against the law in California.
What's the point of singling out hairdressers and waiters and
people who work in non-stressful jobs like that?
So they sent him a questionnaire that said, have you ever worked as a florist, a hairdresser, or a decorator?
Classify them into groups that they can be charged a fair premium. That's the basis of it.
What's a fair premium for somebody who might have the AIDS virus?
Whatever risk
Would you write a policy for somebody you knew had the AIDS virus?
No, probably not.
And he looked at me and right into the camera and he said, why didn't they just ask me if I could lip sync to Judy Garland records?
We have called this press conference as a result and following a recent article in the San Francisco Chronicle.
The Chronicle wrote an article that said, hey, remember that healthcare worker that got infected with HIV at San Francisco General? Well, Jane Doe's paying out of pocket for her healthcare costs because she doesn't want to tell her insurance company that she has HIV.
The risk of being infected from a single bloody needle is relatively small, but try telling that to Jane Doe.
The whole point of the struggle for Jane Doe was to maintain the confidentiality.
There was a rally in the lobby of San Francisco General, and I was there. To be there was bizarre because I am Jane Doe. I worked 12-hour night shifts, and it was the 11th hour. And I was working with a patient who was really sick with cryptococcal meningitis. So I pull out the long tube that has a needle at the end. And I need to dispose of this. And I went to put the needle through the rubber port at the end of the bag, and it went through, I didn't aim correctly, and it went through the bag and into my index finger. This was an absolute puncture with a needle that was filled with blood. What do I do now? I went to the bathroom, turned on the water, and, massaged my finger to try to get my finger to bleed out. It was nerve-wracking. I had been a nurse for 2 years. I'd not had a needle stick.
I remember her coming to me in my office and telling me.
With a lot of sympathy, she said, oh, it's always hard the first time.
She was tested, but it takes a while for the test results to come back.
Within a week or so, I developed a high fever. I started to worry.
I was at work when I heard that she was now HIV positive. And we had to tell her really soon because we wouldn't want her to infect someone else inadvertently.
It was a Saturday morning, and the doorbell rang, and I could see my nurse manager, Allison Moed, standing on the sidewalk. And then I knew.
And I remember the room. I don't remember what I said.
I said to her, I'll never breastfeed. I'll never have a child.
Sorry. She was a beautiful young person. She was a beautiful young woman who was just starting her life, who had come to help these other beautiful young people who were, attacked in the midst of their lives. And, I couldn't protect her.
What I was really thinking about was, how am I going to tell my parents? I flew home. Later on, after I told one of my brothers, he came into the house and my father embraced him and wept and said, I can't bury her. I can't bury her. I went back. I needed to be back. I needed to be on the unit. I was desperate and adamant about holding on to everything that I could. And one of the things I was a nurse. So I kind of just threw myself into that. I drew so much strength from the example of my patients, from the courage of my patients. They helped me go on. And I was so fortunate. I had made a really good friend in Sasha Cutler, who's a nurse on 5A. And I was able to tell him right away.
I just felt like this is so weird. We're both so young.
I got a lot of attention, a lot. You know, I was kind of billed as the innocent victim. I wanted no part of that.
This idea of like, oh, this angel of mercy has been infected by these scuzzy patients. How she became infected, it doesn't make her a better person. And the disease doesn't care.
We would record their deaths here. Through the end of 1983, 24 patients. And so then in 1984, 117 patients. And we were starting to be very overwhelmed.
He died in his sleep.
The nurses gave, and they gave, and they gave.
A lot of people are in deep problems with their families. And I've never really thought of myself as a parent, but I do here, and I find myself occasionally calling patients son. And I've never done that anywhere. But I can't help it. I feel like a mother.
Because you were on such an interpersonal level, that level of loss was there too.
I just see so many lives. If I look at the faces, I see so much life force, there were so many stories, as there are, so many people doing so many things, and then, but they're gone. Look at this. It's 86, 87. These were all lives that had faces for us. Gordon Panisi, Michael Waycaster, James Foote, Bill Palmatier, Terry DeClotz.
These were my friends who were dying. People have sewn real life into these quilts, teddy bears, photographs, locks of hair, and a lot of love letters.
By reporting on it, I could channel my grief and my anger.
You just didn't know that there was a virus out there. And by the time I knew, I stopped having that kind of risky sex. And, 4 years later, I found out that I was infected from before.
I mean, they were so courageous, these people, to go on camera and to bare their souls in 1986, 87.
People just look at the condition and lose sight that there's a person there.
All this equipment, it's like Ringling Brothers setting up the lights and sound and everything and saying, well, what's it like to have AIDS? Basically, that's what we're saying. What's your life like? Well, I'm dying. But they looked right in the camera and did it. And I think it was because they wanted to help other people. And they wanted to help other people not get the disease and figure out how to cope with it if they had it. So I remember them and I admire them and I love them for being able to do that.
Everybody around me died. It's why today I don't have a lot of friends my age. They're gone.
I met Steve on Friday the 13th at this bar called The Pendulum. And 2 weeks later, Steve moved in to my apartment. He was in great health for the first number of years. And then one morning he woke up and he could not get out of bed. And he tested HIV positive. I was so angry that HIV was now in my family life. I was like, as if I had a right. He wasn't yet dying, but it was just a matter of time.
After that, how much does the small stuff really matter?
A friend of mine died on the unit. I took care of him, wrapped his body, and sent it to the morgue.
You don't want to go home and figure out what Diana Ross was winning at Grammys. It's so trivial.
I saw what a toll it was taking on us.
Some people go to counseling or talk to significant others. Some people use drugs or alcohol.
It broke my heart to see these people losing their children.
You need to let go, okay? Just go before Mom and Dad come back, okay? Just, Sean and I are here with you like we've always been with you, okay?
I've also asked HHS to add the AIDS virus to the list of contagious diseases for which immigrants and aliens seeking permanent residence in the United States can be denied entry.
I think it's in our interest as Americans to reduce the drain on our healthcare system.
So you're prepared to tell others that they have to leave the United States, is that right?
Sometimes you make tough choices in life. Favor adding AIDS to the list of diseases that must be quarantined. 56% of the American people answered that yes.
They wanted to isolate us and put us and quarantine us on an island. Of course, we said if it was Santa Catalina, we would go for it.
All of that was happening on the outside world. And so then you had this bubble where people were taking care of people on the ward.
Shane ate like a teenager. And then when he didn't eat, it was then I got scared. And his birthday's coming up.
Shane had only one lung. His other lung was filling with fluid, and he was going to have to decide whether he wanted to continue to live or not. We talked, and he said that the most important thing to him was to stay alive until his father could eventually come around to accepting him and hopefully see him again.
I took my guitar and played for him a few times, sweet songs from church that I wanted to remind him that God loved him.
Yeah, so I was in the Army and I was stationed in Germany, and we were out on bivouac, actually out in the field, and all of a sudden this helicopter came, landed, and people are rushing out, and they come over to me, and your brother's in the hospital, he's not gonna make it, we're flying you back, you're on an emergency flight, here, we got your bags packed. They put me on that helicopter, took me right to the flight line, put me on an emergency flight, and I was out of there, rushing to get back to San Francisco. He couldn't breathe. It was like, doctor came in and said, we don't even know why he's hanging on. He should be gone by now. He is hanging on for something.
Greg's dad came to the hospital and was with the family.
His dad wasn't like in the room, and so I took that chance to tell him, Shane needs to know you love him, and he needs to know you care. He said something about, well, I'm here, and I said, but he needs to hear your words. He needs you to say it.
So my dad had everyone else leave the room. And then he told him, you know, Greg, you're a bigger man than I will ever be, and I'm proud of you, and you know, I love you, and it's okay to go.
After we sang Happy Birthday, he was gone. Just like that.
May God be with you, and may you understand more about life and come to know the Lord. And be happy. Just be happy, okay?
And I remember on one weekend, it was Saturday, and we had 3 services that day. And then Sunday morning, we had our regular church service. There was another memorial that afternoon. And they came to my church, to MCC Church, and they protested out front with God hates fags, fags should die. We're in there mourning the loss of the people that they're out there complaining against. It was so hard for us not to want to go out there and throw stones. So we went out there and we sang to them. And they got back in their van and they left.
Occasionally you would get a minister pop in and go around and be proselytizing. I was always amazed at how cruel they could be. You have someone who's dying, and they're saying things like, repent.
And there were times when we had to ask them to leave.
No, not on our watch.
We're here. It's make or break. We were told by the attorneys we were working with, prepare for the worst. This may not go very well for you.
The nurse's lawyer told labor referee Timothy Sakamaki that AIDS is, quote, spreading to the heterosexual community, and these nurses are in the forefront.
Only linen with blood and feces is being double bagged. The rest of the linen is just treated as normally soiled linen. And I feel we should be more cautious with the linen, and also that nurses should have the right to determine when they need to wear a mask based on common sense principles.
We were being attacked. A lot of it was directed at me. How can you call yourself a professional when you're being so reckless and willing to put yourself and other people in harm's way?
Now the four nurses are telling us there is a homosexual hierarchy here, and that it practices a sort of reverse discrimination.
Majority of the head nurses and supervisors are lesbians and homosexuals.
So what kind of difference does that make?
It has a bearing on how the policy is being made up and how it's being implemented.
This nurse just kind of went off on a rant.
It's like a preferential treatment for AIDS patients.
I knew there was homophobia in the world, but not among nurses.
Her husband was really kind of pushing the whole thing.
The terminology was that it would frighten them if the nurse walked in with a mask on. Their psychosexual social adjustment.
I think it was about more than AIDS. Yeah. I mean, AIDS became a vehicle to justify people's hatred of gays.
There was all sorts of money being given to the AIDS ward, and why didn't the other patients get special things? Everybody deserves treatment, including the pimp who set his hooker on fire. They all deserve treatment. But see, but don't make them heroes. They only cared about their own pleasure.
Why did they choose to have sex? It's like, hello, that's what people do.
In these AIDS care centers, you find out what they're really doing is propagandizing the homosexual lifestyle. I admire their clout and their ability to con the system into getting all these federal tax dollars ostensibly to fight AIDS.
Nurse Vernales also testified that AIDS patients are free to wander around the hospital anytime they like. They're free to visit the public cafeteria here, and they're free to use the public drinking fountains in the hallways.
They let them go and spit where we wash our hands on the sinks.
Visitation by their lovers 24 hours a day, ongoing, and putting people at risk, and nurses not telling them the diagnoses of AIDS patients.
I can't comment, it's so absurd. Thank you.
It was so heated and so vehement. My wife shouldn't have to do this, and no, she shouldn't. She has a choice. She can leave. Members of the labor board had specific questions about practices, what we were doing, were there policies, were there procedures. That went on all day, and I thought it was going to go on several days.
And the response from the union was, that is not only not a union issue, you have a duty to care.
Any kind of isolation barrier between the individual who's providing care and the patient gets in the way to some extent. We'd like to avoid any kind of a barrier unless it's really necessary.
We were vindicated. We all took oaths. Nurses cannot legally, ethically refuse to care for anyone. If it's within our capability to do so, then we have to do it.
There is risk in this work. It's just part of nursing.
You're always going to work with bodily fluids. So if that is a problem, then there may be other, then accounting may be a better option.
We began to feel like the tide had turned.
British Health Minister Norman Fowler has come to San Francisco to study our AIDS care and research.
People came to our unit from worldwide to find out what we were doing, how or why we weren't afraid.
I didn't realize how little I knew. We had our own ideological biases that were unconnected with the facts surrounding the epidemic.
It's brought change for how hospitals work.
You don't have to have a hazmat suit every time you're around an AIDS person. You don't have to burn their bed because they died.
I'd like to introduce you to some of my staff.
They were having a heyday with all the attention they were getting. Except when the cameras were rolling, they were no different than all the rest of the nurses at San Francisco General. Civil service breeds laziness. What do? We just stroke them and cuddle them and give them teddy bears. What are we supposed to do? What is it that they supposedly did that was so fantastic? I've stayed with a lot of patients when they were dying when they had no one else. Well, where was their family? Where were the other gay guys who'd given them the disease? Touching them is nothing, you can touch them all you want. I had their blood on me. Those nurses on the AIDS ward didn't have nearly the hazardous duties that we had. I never saw them portraying us as heroes.
One morning he woke up and he was confused. Steve made no sense when he was talking. And eventually he sank into a coma. He stopped responding altogether. And then, as happens sometimes with people who are bedbound and frail and immunocompromised, then he got pneumonia. I worked on the ward while Steve was there, and I would sleep. They made a little cot for me next to his bed, and so I would talk to him about, it's a beautiful sunrise, I'm gonna go to work. I'm gonna come back as soon as I'm done. One morning, I woke up and he had his eyes open. He couldn't speak, but I could tell that he was there.
These aren't tears of sadness, they're tears of joy. Tears of joy. I feel like I've had a second chance.
Things changed really, really dramatically in 1996.
The hope comes from a new class of medications called protease inhibitors. They knock out the AIDS virus so it cannot be detected in the bloodstream.
When protease inhibitors came along, we knew that was the real deal.
I feel like I'm alive because of them.
Bay Area Reporter, it was a paper. And they read obituaries. Used to be pages long. I mean, and they came out once a week. And I remember the first time when they said there were no obits to put in that week. It had been years since that happened.
I remember talking to Marilyn Chase, who was a Wall Street Journal reporter, and tears were coming down.
That was a wonderful moment, because finally it looked like we had something.
Now, we have deaths, but not at that same level, so it's not over. I can't retire yet.
We talked on the phone a few times, Danny and I, but I didn't stay in touch with him. It was 2 or 3 years after Greg had died. He himself did contract AIDS. I sent him a letter in just the day that the letter came back to me, stamped deceased, was a time that was hard for me because I regretted not having the ability to show Danny the compassion that I knew he needed just as much as Greg did. And I didn't know how. And I always regretted that. And I didn't want to forget how important it was to reach out to someone who was hurting like that. I kept the letter unopened that I had sent him that came back. I still have it, stamped deceased on it. I didn't want to forget. I didn't want to forget how important it is for human beings to be there for one another.
I'm looking for you.
There's a kinship there, as there is for people who live through any devastating experience. So, you know, part of me is still there.
I think there's this whole generation of survivors who have had this shell shock that we haven't even dealt with. I mean, how do you lose most of your friends?
People died, but we made a difference in the way they died. We made a difference in the way the people who loved them were held.
So much in life is not what you say or what you do, it's how you make people feel. And that's the bottom line, is how you make people feel.
The hysteria, the fear-mongering, and how, you know, some people politicized it, and you know, all those things, that if we don't remember that will happen again.
The nurses were the real heroes.
They stood up when nobody else would, and they were willing to take those risks.
Those nurses were colossal. I really was so proud to be their manager and to be one of them. Yeah, you did good things.
You can call it a decision. I say it's how we're made. There's no point in shouting from your island, proclaiming only Jesus saves. There will always be suffering, and there will always be pain. But because of it, there'll always be love, and love we know it will remain. Everybody gets lonely, feel like it's all too much, reaching out for some connection, or maybe just their own reflection. Not everybody finds it, not like the two of us. Sometimes all anybody needs is a human touch. Everybody wants a holiday, everybody wants to feel the sun. Get outside and run around, live like they're forever young. Everybody wants to be beautiful and live life their own way. No one ever wants to let it go, no matter what they do or say. Everybody gets lonely, feel like it's all too much, reaching out for some connection, or maybe just their own reflection. Not everybody finds it.
Bueno, pues hace falta coger aire, ¿verdad? Después de secarse los momentos de emoción, las lágrimas que... bueno, en primer lugar también, ahora, como comentábamos antes, ¿no? Haremos un poquito de debate, si os parece, comentaremos un poco impresiones, aunque realmente hay mucho que decir, porque casi cada una de las frases de las personas, tanto las enfermeras y enfermeros como las personas pacientes y algunos supervivientes, que no hay que olvidar que hay mucha gente que es superviviente de esta época, con todo lo que eso significa, de lo que han vivido, pues bueno, hay que, como decía, reponerse un poquito, ¿no? Por eso, en primer lugar también agradecer a Jansen por el trabajo, ¿no? Y por el reconocimiento, en este caso, al trabajo de enfermería. Bueno, yo si queréis, me parece interesante que podáis aportar un poco, si queréis, impresiones o dudas, preguntas, algo que os haya generado. Y si de momento nadie se anima, yo voy empezando a comentar mis propias reflexiones después de esta segunda visionado del documental, que realmente me ha dejado, igual que la primera vez, impactado, porque realmente es algo que cuanto más vas escuchando y viendo los testimonios, pues más te introduces y te das cuenta de lo que hay, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, eso, lanzo primero la palabra a quien le apetezca, si queréis comentar algo. Vale. Ah, venga. Tenemos micro.
Hola, buenas.
Buenas.
Soy Amador.
¿Qué tal, Amador?
Yo he vivido lo mismo que eso, lo mismo.
Ujú.
En aquella época, bueno, lo sabemos los que llevamos muchos años, ya con el VIH yo llevo 30
Ujú.
y he vivido los peores momentos de mi vida y he llorado mucho en el documental, porque es que era igual. Te aislaban en una habitación, iban todos tapados y te tenían allí, las agujas eran muy grandes. He cogido muchas neumonías, he estado muy enfermo, más de la que la gente se imagina. Neumonía una detrás de otra, te llevaban a casa, volvías otra vez. Fiebre alta, aislado, te discriminaba. Entonces en aquella época, pues imagínate, hablar de esto que tenías, eso era como la peste. Entonces cuando llega la medicación esa, pues yo he llegado a tomar 14 y 16 pastillas. Y nada, he resumido que hoy estoy muy bien. De todo lo que he vivido, estoy súper bien. Tomo una pastilla, he engordado, entonces pesaba 50 kilos. Estuve al borde de la muerte, pero salí. No me digas cómo, y se murieron amigos míos detrás. Y lo pasé muy mal, muy mal. Entonces me he visto reflejado en el documental ese. Porque las enfermeras bueno, eran parecidas a estas, era de aquí en España, pero hacían lo mismo. Cuando venían los médicos, pero fíjate, en una habitación solo. Qué duro era. Y la ropa tuya aparte. Bueno, y empezar a contar no acabaría. Entonces me reflejo en ese documental porque he vivido lo mismo. Y lo he pasado muy mal. He perdido muchos trabajos porque siempre estaba de baja y cuando iba a trabajar me tenía que llevar mis 14 pastillas o cuando llegaba a casa. Como no las quería, las tiraba, mi madre me las volvía a dar. Y así hasta que... Y nada, y ahora mira, estoy aquí, llevo ya, estoy súper bien. Y vamos, y doy gracias a que esto vaya avanzando. Bueno, aún queda, pero... Y nada, eso es mi historia.
Pues eso. Gracias, Amador.
He vivido mucho, lo he vivido muy mal, lo he pasado muy mal.
Justo contigo tenemos un ejemplo de esto que decía, ¿no? De alguien que ha sobrevivido y podemos aprender o sea, de aprender, por supuesto, de tu experiencia. Que decir que
yo me he perdido muchas fiestas. Mis amigos se iban y yo estaba en el hospital o estaba en casa. Vamos, yo me he perdido media vida en el hospital. Aparte que las operaciones que he tenido yo, tengo más de 15, algunas se me notan. Yo llegaba, cuando me diagnosticaron el VIH, uno de los médicos, no me acuerdo de qué, iban a operarme. Entonces me dicen que no me operan porque tengo que llevar esto a un centro de salud, porque hay una chica, una enfermera, que trata lo del VIH. Y yo voy allí, cuando me dice que soy VIH, a mí me cae el mundo encima. Ya me quería suicidar, lo pasé muy mal. Imagínate cuando llego a casa y se lo digo a mis padres.
Claro.
Mis hermanos eran pequeños. Tengo que decírselo también. Y me armé de valor y lo dije. Y luego ya al resto de la familia y tal. Pero vamos, que fue una época muy mala. Fui despedido del trabajo también, para que lo sepáis, que lo pasé muy mal. Estuve con abogados, con juicios, tuve, vamos, una guerra. Trabajando de pinche de cocina, fíjate, la tontería mía que se lo dices al camarero y en 2 días me despiden. Y entonces, pues luego ya, pues por los años, ya me jubilan porque yo voy empeorando, mis defensas bajan. Una asociación que yo iba, donde yo vivía, que tenía que hablar con el médico, porque el día de mañana a lo mejor me moría. La enfermedad estaba ahí, el SIDA, y yo estaba muy bajo, entonces aún no me daban medicación y bueno, y así, hasta que llegaron a jubilarme. Pero para que veáis que por trabajar en nada, hoy en día esto no sé si aún sí creo que pasa, ¿no? Aún despiden a la gente.
Ahora comentaremos sobre eso si queréis. Bueno, es muy importante, yo creo, ahora que nos cuentes la experiencia de Amador, porque realmente estamos viendo un documental, ¿no?, que se ha grabado lógicamente en Estados Unidos, ¿no? Y a veces dices, pues eso está allá. Pero realmente esto ha sido y sigue siendo, y esa experiencia la hemos vivido aquí, se ha vivido aquí, o sea que no nos pensemos en un universo lejano, ni muchísimo menos, que somos todos vecinos, aunque haya territorio de por medio,
Claro.
pero yo creo que el estigma y Y el trabajo de enfermería, que me ha gustado también, que has nombrado, que las enfermeras aquí hacían lo mismo.
Sí.
Se quejaban un poco de eso de que tiene que hacer el paciente ahí solo, cerrado y tal.
Te cuidaban mucho,
y que-
te daban la mano.
y esa cercanía, ese trato humano que
Igual,
al final-
hasta la de la
Ujú.
limpieza lo hacía. Porque se lo comentaban a la chica de la limpieza, tienes que tratar a Amador así, que tiene el SIDA. Entonces decían el SIDA, no tiene el VIH. ¿Sabes? Ya te trataban ya como el SIDA.
Sí, sí, sí.
Pero me han cuidado mucho, la verdad que mis padres en gloria estén los dos, ya no los tengo. Me han cuidado mucho, mucho, porque mi madre, lo que pasó conmigo con esto, de verdad. Y ahora la echo de menos estar en el cielo, pero bueno.
Pues sí. Bueno, pues una cosa que eso, ¿no? Bueno, quería comentar, Jancho, que algo en relación con el tema del trabajo. No, vale. No, como te he visto ahí. Eso, precisamente, a mí había dado, cuando se ve el documental al principio, ya se empieza hablando un poco de quién está al frente del cuidado del virus, de quién se encarga de ese cuidado y de esa situación de desconocimiento e incertidumbre, ¿no? Y precisamente ha habido, y en el documental se muestra el debate en relación a aquellas personas profesionales de enfermería que querían o que estaban más, digamos, a favor, luchando por conseguir un cierto aislamiento de las personas con SIDA, como dice el documental, y aquellas personas que estaban mostrando la necesidad del trato humano, ¿no? Ese debate, que parece que sea algo, ¿no?, olvidado o bueno, representado ahí, pues como decimos, sigue presente y quizás quizás llega justo a las entrañas de lo que es la profesión enfermera, ¿no? Y bueno, a mí, quizás para resolver un poco este posible debate, quizás una cosa está en una de las frases que ha dicho uno de los entrevistados en el documental, que dice, bueno, tienes la elección. O sea, eres enfermera, ¿no? Pues por lo que sea, pero es una profesión que puedes dejar en cualquier momento. Quiero decir que, en el fondo, la profesión real es, ¿no?, el objetivo o la función de enfermería es cuidar, ¿no? Cuidar a las personas, ayudar y suplir en aquello que no pueden hacer y acompañarles de la mejor manera en su proceso de morir, ¿no? Cosa que también se ha visto en el documental. Entonces, todos estos debates que surgen, ¿no?, todas estas afirmaciones que se observan en el documental, sí que hacen como repensar todo el rato lo que se está haciendo como enfermería. Y yo siempre, cuando lo estaba viendo, me planteaba cómo ha cambiado, ¿no?, el trabajo que tenemos en enfermería en relación con las personas que viven con VIH y cómo fue en los inicios, ¿no? Y lo que ha supuesto de aprendizaje para la profesión, porque, por ejemplo, como vemos al final del documental, pues, por ejemplo, una de las enfermeras desarrolló la técnica más novedosa en ese momento para evitar pinchazos, ¿no?, para canalizar las vías, ciertas cuestiones que nos ha enseñado bueno, ¿no?, todo lo que ha supuesto el VIH y el SIDA. Entonces, bueno, con lo negativo, lógicamente, que tiene que ver con una muerte prematura, porque hemos visto que era gente muy joven, que se moría muy joven, ¿no? Pues también están cosas positivas como todo lo que hemos aprendido también dentro de la profesión. No sé si tenéis alguna cosa más, que yo me pongo a hablar y me enrollo mucho. ¿Queréis comentar alguna cosilla más? Me ha gustado mucho también una frase que dicen que es: mientras hablo, si alguien quiere levantar la mano, vais, que está aquí el compillo, os pasa el micro enseguida. Las enfermeras somos subversivas, eso me ha encantado, porque, ¿no?, una de las cosas que dice es, no tenemos, identificamos y damos compasión, que dicen, ¿no?, que esa palabra aquí quizás a nosotros nos resuena un poquillo más, pero cercanía, trato humano, cariño, acompañamiento, toque, cuerpo, carne, piel, que eso hace falta, ¿no? Cuando las propias familias de estos hombres, en concreto, por ejemplo, cómo se retrata en el documental, ¿no?, pues hombres gays sobre todo, con todo el estigma que suponía en aquella época, ¿no?, que aún existe, claro, de otra manera, pero ese es otro tema, ¿no? Esa capacidad de suplir ya no solo funciones físicas, suplir en la higiene personal, en el autocuidado, sino suplir en la parte emocional. Tu familia no te apoya, tu familia no quiere estar contigo, tu familia no sabe cómo comportarse contigo. Tranquila que aquí estoy yo, tranquilo que aquí estoy yo, que te cojo de la mano, que te escucho, que te comento, que te hablo. Bueno, entonces, otra de las cosas por las que frente a una sociedad en aquel momento que quería prohibir la entrada de personas con VIH al país y quería eliminar a personas que vivían con VIH en ese país y sus familias, las enfermeras al menos y los enfermeros al menos, los de esta planta, como se trata en el documental, ahí estaban, cogiendo de la mano. Por eso lo de subversivas, pienso yo, ¿no? También una de las cosas que se retrata es el impacto en la propia salud como profesionales. Salud física, pero también salud emocional, ¿no? Pues eso, pues yo llegaba a casa y bebía un poco más de lo que bebía habitualmente. Tenía que hablar con mi pareja en casa para desahogarme. Bueno, pues cada uno tuvo situaciones, ¿no? Claro, el impacto emocional de ver personas jóvenes morir en situaciones muy agónicas, ¿no? Y muy complicadas, pues claro, afecta. Pero bueno, también aparece, como os digo, es un poco calía de arena, ¿no? Lógicamente, lo que tiene la vida. A veces o sea, está el sufrimiento, pero también está lo que te llevas, ¿no? Y lo que se llevaban, por ejemplo, el testimonio de la enfermera, que al final, si os dais, cuando en el documental dice, aquella que llaman NN, que es una de las entrevistadas que tiene una presencia importante en el documental, dice, fui yo la que se pinchó y no podía dejar de trabajar, tuve que volver, tuve que apoyarme en todo lo que estaba haciendo esta gente por sobrevivir y eso me ayudó a continuar y a seguir adelante y por suerte pues bueno pues pudo acceder a los tratamientos y pudo continuar y tener hijos como parte del documental que era una de sus preocupaciones y toda la situación. O sea que bueno pues esa parte también es destacable, ¿no? Como vamos superando.
Me llama la atención lo que provoca el miedo desconocido, como en general, ¿no? A todos y a todas nos puede paralizar, ¿no? Que es lo más general, o por el contrario pueden hacer surgir unos resortes de solidaridad y de compromiso, que lo vemos muy claro, de compromiso, de implicación, de voluntariado, de vocación, de todos los profesionales sanitarios que han actuado de esta manera en este documental y también en otros momentos de la historia, ¿no? Es importante cómo, dependiendo de cada uno, se puede reaccionar de una manera o de otra. Yo creo que es importante, ¿no? Y por otro lado también destacaría la importancia de la implicación de las administraciones sanitarias, en este caso en Estados Unidos, que hasta casi 10 años después no reconocieron la existencia del VIH y del SIDA. Con lo cual, yo creo que de alguna manera los profesionales y bueno, la gente allegada fueron las que cuidaron y ayudaron a todas estas personas que por parte de la administración estaban totalmente olvidadas. De hecho, creo recordar que en Estados Unidos no se admitía la presencia de personas con VIH, no se debía entrar en el país hasta hace 10 años, 2008 o algo así me parece recordar. O sea, con todo lo... Sí, no se podía entrar hasta 2008 o algo así, ¿no? Que también es destacable decir, hombre, un país con todo el conocimiento, con toda la información, con todos los avances que tienen, pues como limitaban también, como otros países siguen hoy en día haciendo lo mismo, que no dejar la entrada a personas con VIH. Y como gracias a la presión social, que es muy importante, se consiguen derechos. Y de alguna manera yo creo que si no fuese por esa presión social, que hay multitud de manifestaciones, de ejemplos que salía la gente a la calle pues protestando por la medicación, porque la medicación en la CAT cuando salió en el 87 no era eficaz, era muy duro, y cómo salía la gente a protestar diciendo que querían que la investigación fuera más avanzada, que se investigara en investigación para poder sobrevivir a esas circunstancias, ¿no? Yo creo que son cosas que tenemos que aprender un poco de la historia pues para el futuro.
Sí, una de las cosas que también me planteaba es esa, cómo se tardó tanto en hacer investigación, ¿no? Que en aquellos momentos, bueno, sí que es verdad que son los 80 y que el desarrollo tecnológico pues ha cambiado y en los últimos años a nivel médico y a nivel clínico se ha hecho mucha investigación y ha avanzado muy rápido. Y ha habido mucho trabajo en ensayos clínicos, es decir, que esta enfermedad sí que nos ha ayudado mucho a visibilizar esta importancia concreta de trabajar buscando siempre el mejor tratamiento con las personas, ¿no? Avanzar en ese sentido. Pero una de las posibles explicaciones que a mí me venían a la cabeza en aquel momento, de por qué en aquel momento no había habido desarrollo, no se corrió tanto, vamos a decir, y esto es una opinión más basada bueno, no sé, más de reflexión, porque de alguna manera tiene que ver con el propio estigma. Yo pienso que tiene que ver con qué personas eran las afectadas en aquellos momentos. En el caso lo vemos muy claro en San Francisco, pues hombres gays, ¿no? Todo el rato. Entonces, había una doble moral en eso, que también a nivel político, como retrata el documental, se utilizó también de alguna manera para frenar ciertos avances. No puedo pensar que quizás fuera por ahí. Bueno, también por lo que decía, ¿no? También está claro que el desarrollo tecnológico era otro. Pero hay ocasiones que la salud no es algo que sea un valor, yo siempre lo digo, que no es un valor fundamental real. Lo decimos mucho, pero siempre hay intereses político-económicos, administrativos, como queramos, que juegan, o que pueden llegar a aprovecharse de la situación de salud o pérdida de salud de las personas. A mí hay una cosa... Y yo no sé si vamos a terminar con el debate, si no queréis comentar mucho más, porque yo hablo mucho y me...
Si no cuentas nada, nos vamos.
Eso, si no contáis nada, nos vamos. Pues sí que hay una cosa que me gustaría tener presente y tiene que ver también con los nuevos retos, para mí, que tenemos, por ejemplo, en enfermería y en general en salud, desde este punto de vista del cuidado y de la atención más humana a las personas, en relación con estos retos, que sí que se retratan en cierta manera en el documental. Hablamos, por ejemplo, hoy en día mucho de la importancia de que las comunidades, de que los grupos, que la gente participe en la toma de decisiones en su propia salud. Pues en el documental hay un momento muy interesante que retrata en cierta manera esto, quizás todavía sin todas las teorías que hoy en día ya tenemos sobre cómo hacer participación de la comunidad en la salud, pero la gente que conocía, la gente que estaba ingresada del barrio, surge la imagen muy interesante y muy divertida también de esta performer que venía y que recogía dinero en las fiestas para luego llevar pollo, hacer un festival, unos pasteles, ¿no? Alegrar un poco el día a día de esta situación con estas personas. Y entonces creo que ahí se escuchaba mucho más las necesidades de las personas, sus familias y sus entornos, ¿no? O sea que realmente, aunque estamos hablando de los 80, esa experiencia concreta es muy novedosa. Hoy en día la consideramos muy novedosa. Entonces creo que uno de los retos que tenemos es poder mantener esto, ¿no? Y ver cómo las personas que viven con VIH participan o deben de participar en la toma de decisiones sobre su propia salud, que al final también tiene que ver con la salud de la comunidad y con la salud de todos, ¿no? En conjunto. Entonces esa parte ahí me ha parecido bastante interesante. Y me ha gustado mucho y me ha emocionado mucho, la verdad, también os lo voy a decir, el ver a la enfermera esta que es la NN, cuando lee el libro de registro de cuando estaban allí, esas hojas que va pasando las hojas, y va nombrando cada uno y va recordando vidas y experiencias y momentos de relación con estas personas. Y dice unas frases que dice como, estas personas que tuvieron vidas maravillosas y que son personas maravillosas. Quiero decir que hacían tantas cosas, sí. O sea, que es bueno, pues ya está. Es lo bueno también que tiene cuidar a la gente, que te llevas mucho más, ¿no? de lo que se puede ver a simple vista. Y que al final, pasados los años, ¿no? puedes recordar muchísimas historias de gente muy buena que hace muchas cosas. Pues eso. Ay, sí.
Bueno, quiero dar las gracias por la jornada y por esta película que nos habéis puesto. Y bueno, dar las gracias a todo el cuadro y a los enfermeros y enfermeras, porque aquí ha quedado claro la gran humanidad que tenéis. Ahora que se habla tanto de la humanización de la sanidad, cuando me ha tocado estar en hospitales acompañando a familiares, he de reconocer que sois el alma de los hospitales y que, bueno, que tratáis siempre con mucho cariño y con mucha humanidad y trabajáis mucho a nivel emocional con los enfermos. Así que muchas gracias.
Pues muchas gracias, Mercedes. ¿Algún otro comentario? ¿Alguna pregunta? Bueno, pues pasamos a cerrar la jornada. De verdad que para ONSIDA y para todo el equipo de ONSIDA ha sido un auténtico placer esta jornada. Aparte de la afluencia de gente que hemos tenido, yo creo que los temas que hemos estado tratando yo creo que son muy interesantes, que un poco nos hacen empezar a plantearnos cuál es el futuro de la sanidad, cuál es el modelo de sanidad que queremos. Yo creo que hemos hablado sobre la sostenibilidad, hemos hablado sobre la participación de los pacientes, hemos hablado sobre la humanización de la salud, hemos hablado sobre las nuevas tecnologías, hemos dado un repaso a la situación que ha cambiado un poco nuestras vidas con relación al COVID y espero que os haya gustado a todos y a todas y que el próximo año pues, podamos seguir celebrando las jornadas y que asistáis todos y todas. Y nada, muchísimas gracias.